This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. We start the show, as we always do, with a big thank you to everyone who subscribed to our podcast and followed us on social media. You know, this podcast is not about getting millions of subs, and it's certainly not about me making money. Though, if you want to hire me or any of the people we interview on the show, please do feel free to reach out. This is about sharing information and best practices and getting those ideas straight from the people who live them day in and day out, whether they're PR people, reporters, editors, photographers, videographers. We try to talk to them all here on the show. And so we try to pass along their knowledge to you so you can utilize that in your day-to-day. So subscribe to the podcast if you're not already. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Also check out our homepage on anchor.com. Record a message that we can play on the show or leave us some feedback there. And also check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Continue to send your messages and your questions that you want answered on the show. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get right into our guest for this week. Steve Kastenbaum is a radio journalist, former Westwood One News senior correspondent and New York bureau chief, a former CNN radio New York correspondent, and a proud native Brooklynite. Steve has done it all. He's traveled all over the world. He's covered breaking news, important stories that shape our world, and we're really thrilled to have him here as a guest. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jody. I'm happy to be here.
It's good to talk with you. We cross paths every once in a while, but you and I actually started out together in the 1010 Wins newsroom in New York City many years ago, right?
That's right. While I was just 19 years old, I started working part-time in the newsroom at 1010 Wins when we still had reel-to-reel tape machines in the edit bays, and we still cut tape with a razor blade and a grease pencil. So we go way back, yes.
Those were the days, absolutely. So things have become a little more technologically advanced since then, but I think a lot of the core principles are probably still the same. So tell us a little bit about what you do as a broadcast news reporter. I imagine there's a special set of skills that you have.
Yeah, definitely. We're not concerned with video, so we don't have to worry about this element that TV journalists are so consumed with in order to produce a package, which makes our job so much more easier, less complicated. And we're telling stories with audio. And because of that, you know, we're able to really drill down into the core facts about a story and not have to worry about how am I presenting this to a viewing audience. It's really just about the facts. And it enables, you know, a radio journalist, a radio reporter, a producer to really take people on a journey with audio. You know, it's theater of the mind, they sometimes call it. And you can do things very basically and just do a one-on-one interview. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some of those one-on-one interviews are extremely informative and eye-opening and bring people information that they otherwise did not have. And maybe they bring a topic to a listener that's new to them, or it expands their knowledge of a topic. And then there's the other way to go. You can really take someone on a journey by incorporating sound from that particular story area, wherever you are, whether it's the streets of New York City, maybe you're in a park, maybe you're at a press conference indoors. You have the sound of that room that you're able to bring into the story when you're producing it. There's all sorts of ways that radio journalists make their reporting distinct, and I love telling a story with audio and not having to worry about video, because so much of what you see in a television package, in a television news package, is what they call B-roll. It's fill, and they need to fill up the screen with something while they're talking. And in radio, you know, we don't have to worry about having to gather an extra added element that, to me, is really kind of just fluff. You know, it's not really part of the story. It's there to catch the eye. Whereas audio, you know, any audio that winds up in your piece and your reporting, whether you're doing a one-on-one interview or using that sound the ambient sound from your story scene is actually part of the storytelling. It's integral. It's an integral part of the storytelling, and it's needed in getting that information across to the listener.
Yeah, I feel like that, what you and I refer to as natural sound, right? The background noise that you might
Hmm.
hear depending on the environment that you're in. It can be so evocative and it can be so critical in telling your story. I mean, you and I are sitting here, on a couple of microphones with virtually no sound behind us, right? But if we just simply threw some street noise behind us, it would sound like we're standing out on 42nd Street in the middle of Manhattan.
Right.
And we could almost pretend that we are, right?
Yeah.
And that would evoke a certain emotion from the listener. So you're right, and you and I both started out as radio reporters, and I've always felt the same way, that while TV reporting is important, the visual is very literal, right? And
Hmm.
the way you can tell a radio story using that background sound, that natural sound, can be so much more evocative if you want it to be, right? And that means the radio reporters have to work a little bit harder, you think?
I think so. I think that we have to be very aware of what's going on around us at all times. And when you work in long form radio, especially, you're recording everything. You're walking into a building to set the scene. You're recording your interviewee introducing themselves and telling you their name and explaining who they are, what they do. You're using every aspect of your work day in your piece, or potentially using it in your piece. You don't stop recording, and I think you have to be thinking about that all the time, how something might fit into a piece that you're out doing interviews on, or out doing some investigative reporting on, investigative journalism on. You're constantly thinking about elements of that story and making sure you have them, because it's really, nothing's worse than going home. You have all your tape, and it's often said that for TV and radio it's kind of similar. Sometimes it can take an hour of tape to get a minute of material, but so sometimes you can wind up getting back to your studio, or if you're working out of your home, and listen back to all that tape and then realize, oh man, I didn't record that one little thing and I need that. and there's no going back. So you just record everything now, and it's a lot to go through. But when you remember that you have these different elements that you can put into the storytelling that really helps to tell the story, it makes it a better piece. And again, there's nothing wrong with a one-on-one interview like the one we're having right now. That's perfectly fine. If a person is a newsmaker and an expert, that's all you need. You just need that one-on-one information. But other stories require more sound-rich production, and that's my wheelhouse. I love those types of stories.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that I listen to a whole bunch of podcasts during the week. One of the ones that I enjoy listening to on a regular basis is the New York Times, The Daily,
Right.
which is sort of an expansion on the story of the day. And I've heard them more and more frequently over the last couple of years, using just what you're talking about, sort of that natural sound or that in the moment sound of a reporter out on the street, walking up to someone and talking to them. And it's not like they're standing there going, here we are on the street, sort of announcing themselves. It's almost like this background ambient noise where you hear them walk up to somebody and say, hi, I'm so-and-so with the New York Times. Would you like to talk to me about such and such? But it really sets the scene of what
Right.
they're doing out there. And they're primarily print reporters,
Yes.
who are going to be filing a print story or a written story. But they're utilizing that sound in the same way that you and I did do as radio reporters, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was at CNN Radio, we were pioneering what the New York Times does now with the Daily, and we called it Newsday, and we released it every day at around 4:30, and it was at the top of the CNN.com homepage, and it's almost exactly what the Daily does now. And it was really an opportunity for us to experiment and use our creative juices. CNN gave us a wonderful opportunity at the time to do this, and it was coming together. And each week it got better and better, and it's something that I'm very proud of. It's one of the most distinct moments in my career that I'm extremely proud of the work that I did along with my colleagues at CNN Radio at the time, because we were really pioneering that daily audio news podcast. And the format, it's almost exactly what the New York Times is doing today. It's unfortunate that CNN and the president of the company, Jeff Zucker, at the time, decided that the radio wasn't in his future business plans and killed the radio unit, because had CNN acknowledged where podcasting was going, we could have been at the forefront of it at the time, and that was our goal. We had this long-term business model in place at the time, and it just wasn't part of Jeff Zucker's vision for the CNN product. It's when I hear the New York Times Daily every day, it's it's kind of bittersweet for me, because we could have I feel like we could have owned that real estate in the podcast market if CNN had stuck with it. But it's business. It's nothing personal.
Yeah, it certainly is. But news has changed so much over the years. And when we talk about being a broadcast reporter, whether that's radio or TV, we used to think sort of in cycles, right? And there was like the morning news shows, the midday news shows, the afternoon news shows, and then radio was kind of in between. But even radio worked in cycles as well, like the even hour, odd hour kind of thing, or you refresh the show every a few hours, the morning, the afternoon. But what used to be 12-hour news cycles, a couple decades ago, or maybe a decade ago, became a 24-hour news cycle. And now with the rise of social media influencing news gathering so much, Twitter, Facebook, what have you, it seems like our news cycles are hour to hour and even minute to minute. I was talking with someone on a previous episode, and we talked about how, they're doing political PR, and they've got their arms wrapped around a story and what they have their person wanting to say, and suddenly a tweet comes in at deadline and it completely upends the storyline. That changes the questions the reporters are asking, and it can really, I don't want to say throw a wrench in it, but it kind of upends everything, and it's sort of minute to minute. How do you keep up with it all, and how do you focus on what you think is important when you're reporting a story?
I think it's really hard to stay focused on what's important today, especially when newsrooms have been somewhat decimated, really. Over the last 10 years, the size of a newsroom has shrunk. There are certainly some news outlets that still have very large staffs, like NBC News and their various entities at NBC, but everyone has shrunk. CNN's a great example of that, of how the staff has shrunk, but they're doing more. And so staying focused is really difficult. And the emphasis is on being first. You don't want to miss something. And I think that's unfortunate, because it doesn't give journalists the time to go in depth as much as they used to. It certainly means investigative journalism has had to find new sort of benefactors who see the value in investigative journalism and want to fund that, because it's not part of the business model for many news outlets these days, especially television news outlets, television news networks. It's extremely difficult to stay focused. You don't want to go to bed at night. You're afraid you're going to miss something the moment you close your eyes, and then wake up in the morning and find out you missed something. It's very anxiety inducing too. It creates a very stressful work environment for everyone who's in journalism. You're constantly flicking through Twitter and your social media feeds and everyone else's social media outlets, their accounts, to make sure you're not missing something. And it's unfortunate, because we see this just incredible tsunami of information that's coming out every minute, really, and it's hard to decipher, first of all, what's important, what's relevant, and what isn't, what's just a diversion, what's just misinformation or just out there to distract you, and what you should be focused on. It's really hard to do that in today's landscape. And Twitter, I think, sort of leads the pack with that. It's this constant stream being updated, and as a reporter, it's unless your editor tells you, just focus on this today and don't look at anything else. If you have a beat, you don't want to miss anything, and so it's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I see it come over the transom, and every time I see so much of this information coming down, and I follow, official news outlets, the reporters who work for those outlets, and I try to be very, very discerning with what I follow, what I choose to consume, and pushing away as much of the static as I can. I can't imagine the stress that you and other reporters are under in trying to cover a story when, like you said, this tsunami of information is coming through the social media pipelines, and you're just trying to make sense of the story you're working on that day.
Absolutely. And then you have, a very purposeful disinformation campaign going on, over social media these days. And so on top of all of the actual real news, you have journalists who are trying to set the record straight, when that stuff comes out, and it's frustrating.
Well, and I wanted to get into that with you too, because I as a former reporter, and now PR person, the one thing that I've always relied on is the factual truth, right? What
Mhm.
are the actual facts? And even as a PR person, people sometimes accuse PR people of spinning, which is like nails on a chalkboard for me. In my opinion, PR people don't spin; they represent their client, but they always tell a factual story.
Mhm.
Um, and because you're trying to tell that to a reporter who you want to report that factually. And so if the
Mhm.
reporter can't believe you, then you've burned your relationship with the reporter, right?
Mhm.
But like you said, there's and I think this has really come to a head in the last 4 years, and I don't want to get political, but that's the facts. This
Mhm.
has come to a head in the last 4 years, and I think there are some culprits out there who have done intentional misinformation, engaged in intentional misinformation, for whatever reason they feel that they need to. But you've been outspoken on social media, and let some of your personal opinions be known. And I know that I do the same on social media, even though sometimes they say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that," because you might lose business. My opinion is, if you have a problem with what I think, I probably don't want to do business with you anyway. but 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 uh, uh, do you lots of reporters have Twitter feeds, right? Lots of reporters
Yes.
are outspoken on Twitter, and I personally think they can be, and they should be. But do you think, or what are the challenges, maybe, do you think that has, with the objective way you need to go about your job?
Yeah.
Understand, maybe we can get into the definition of what objective is too, but do you think that blurs the line of objectivity for a reporter? How objective can a reporter be, and how is a reporter objective? What does that mean to
Mhm.
you?
So for me, a lot of what is out there that some people might say is personal opinion. I'm actually reacting to something I've seen on someone else's Twitter feed that, in my experience out in the streets here in New York, is wrong. And so I'll take, for example, right now, the whole New York is a ghost town, New York is dead thing that the president amplified in the last debate. Clearly, New York is not a ghost town. Clearly, it's not dead. And I'm very passionate about that because it's a lie. Yes, we're going through an incredible struggle right now and an unprecedented crisis. And that crisis is made worse by what some people would say is a failure in leadership in City Hall. And so I'm not denying that we have problems here in New York. I'm not denying that those problems aren't serious and long lasting. But this narrative that New York City is dead, that it's a ghost town, is a myth. It's a lie. And so to some people, it may come across as opinion when I combat that, and I can understand that because they might not be here, and so their images of New York are colored by whoever it is they watch on TV and whoever it is they listen to out there in social media. But it's not opinion. It might be very strongly worded, when I put it out there, but it's based in fact. I'll share information about what's going on here in New York and the struggles that people are experiencing right now. But at the same time, I will show that it isn't a ghost town. And with coronavirus, that's another issue where after having lived through the worst of it, how I can speak very specifically with expertise about how bad it was here in New York, literally right outside my window at Brooklyn Hospital. I feel that I can talk in very strong language, but very anchored in facts when I do that, to combat misinformation and perceptions of coronavirus that are just wrong. And if people want to say I'm expressing opinion, I'll come back at them and say no, and here's why this is an opinion, why this is fact. But sometimes I'm just not going to change their views of what I'm doing, because they have their own views and ideology maybe, and their heels are dug in, and they're not going to be convinced otherwise.
Yeah, that wretched phrase "alternate facts" jumps to mind, which I think is one of the worst phrases that's ever been, and frankly, most damaging phrases that's ever been invented. Because I don't think that we can accomplish anything that we want to accomplish if we can't agree on facts, right? And something as simple as, the sky is blue. That's an oversimplification, but
Right.
or like you said, you look out your window at what's going on across the street and you see it with your own eyes, and you report that as a reporter, and someone says, just because they disagree with you, or that's not the version of reality that they want to promote, they say, oh, well, that's not the truth. And so we've
Right.
got this sort of bizarro land that has sown distrust in the people who we actually trust, like yourself, to report information, factual information to us on what's going on in our world. I think we've arrived at this very dangerous place in our
Yeah.
society.
I'll give you another example of that. There's often criticism of the Trump rallies, for example, because people are seen not wearing masks. Events like the announcement of President Trump's Supreme Court justice nomination at the White House, and there were people indoors at the White House, not just outdoors. And we later learned that this was the potential super spreader event that led to the president and others getting coronavirus. You get people who go online and say, so it's not okay for Trump supporters, but it's okay for Black Lives Matter protesters to go around by the thousands in March during the pandemic. And they say that the news media has a double standard. And it irks me, because then I go back and I show, no, it's not an equivalent. And here's video, and here are photos of all of the protests I covered here in New York, and almost every single individual is wearing a mask. Whereas if you look at these videos and these images of that Trump rally or that indoor gathering at the White House, and people are not wearing masks. And so there is a difference. And so, again, people think, oh, you're siding with one side over the other. And for me, I'm just presenting facts. I'm showing that it's a false equivalence, because there is a difference in the way the two groups were behaving. And yeah, sure, of course, I acknowledge that some people at some Black Lives Matter protests in some parts of the country haven't been wearing masks. But here in New York, I can only speak to what I've covered. And it's been my experience and the experience of my colleagues that there is near universal adherence to mask wearing mandates at the Black Lives Matter protests and marches. And so I'm going to make that clear.
Yeah, it's an interesting world we're living in right now. and it's got to be interesting from your perspective too, as a reporter going out and covering these things. I mean, you see the stuff up close and personal. You see far more than you are able to report, right? I mean, there's so much that goes on that simply doesn't make it into your reports because there's not enough time, and what have you. And you want to report the main things that people should be understanding. Flipping the script, though, a little bit in terms of how, because it is the PR podcast, right? We want to talk about how reporters and PR people interact. And certainly, as a PR person, I am pitching stories for my clients all the time. And I think that's based on, my success is based on my relationships with reporters and sort of what they think of me and my work. How do you entertain pitches from PR people? I mean, you're covering a lot of breaking news, and you've traveled all around the world to lots of different news hotspots. So I gather you probably don't get a lot of, or even concern yourself with a lot of PR pitches, but sort of in a general, or maybe you do, but in a general sense, how do you interact with PR people, if at all?
So, I know public relations account execs are very well aware that so many of the emailed pitches just wind up in the trash bin every day, and that's got to be frustrating for them. But it's just, given this news cycle right now, and given all those things we talked about how the 24-hour news cycle is so anxiety inducing, and people just don't even have the bandwidth. Sometimes, individual producers don't have the bandwidth at times to even read those pitches, because they're so engrossed in covering the news as it's unfolding minute by minute. And it's for me, when I was at Westwood One News, the pitches that came in were most useful for me for leaving evergreen pieces over the weekend that would run and that would be distributed to our affiliate stations. And there were a good number of public relations people who represented certain clients who were able to pitch stories that they knew fit our needs as a radio network. And they were stories like, for instance, surveys about shoppers, about retail shoppers, that they may release that survey on a Thursday, but it's still good for use on Saturday to me as a reporter, and fills a need because there's less news going on a Saturday and a Sunday than there is on a weekday. So we looked for those stories regularly every week that we could put in the can and have set to be released on a Saturday or a Sunday to our affiliates, and maybe even used on a Monday morning. The stuff that could be piggybacked onto government economic reports was often really good and useful for me as a radio journalist. I could do interviews with those experts at those various businesses, various entities that tracked maybe retail spending, or maybe tracked retail businesses and what the trends were, or maybe the credit card industry and consumer credit. I found things like that to be very useful. Industry groups, maybe in the housing industry, or things like those that could be, again, piggybacked off of government reports, which come out every week. It was very useful to get those pitches. So I would look for those particular public relations account executives' emails, because after using them once or twice, I knew that they had somebody, an expert that I can rely on for an interview, or recorded interview, to put out some recorded pieces that were interesting, that were stories that weren't the main story, were a sidebar off of that government figure that was released. And that was really helpful. Hospital public relations executives got a workout, obviously, during coronavirus, during the pandemic, in its worst days here in New York. And the folks at some of the larger hospital corporations were extremely helpful in dispelling myths and separating fact from fiction, and also telling us what was going on with advances in research and understanding this disease. I found the people at Mount Sinai to be extremely helpful, because they were running several trial studies while also doing patient history studies and gathering information through that. So that was interesting. They were doing the blood plasma treatment at the time, in addition to other therapeutic treatment studies. So I found them really helpful, and some other hospital groups as well. And then the individual hospitals had their own public relations people, the independent hospitals who needed to get their stories out. And so, those people making themselves available to us almost 24/7 was greatly appreciated, because it helped to tell the story by putting us in touch with people who were on the front line. But I know public relations people have their clients and they have to represent them, and they're paid to get those people on some coverage. But it's really difficult, when you're working on a particular story as a journalist or as a producer, and you get these pitches that come across your inbox that have nothing to do with what you're working on every day. And I'm sure it's frustrating for both those newsroom employees and the public relations executives as well.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're talking about is something that we talk about a lot too, and what I urge other PR people to do is know the person you're sending it to. Maybe not specifically the person, but know what that reporter reports on, know what they're interested in, and also just be relevant, to what they're doing. You were talking about, pitching experts. That's a great way to not only provide value to the reporter and to the reporter's audience, but to grow a reputation and grow a relationship with a reporter, is to just make sure that you're delivering them some value, something that they can use, but having some familiarity with the reporter in the first place. Don't pitch a consumer story to a real estate reporter or what have you.
Yeah.
Pitch them on their beat, pitch them on what's interesting to them, and also know what they're working on. We'll go back to what you have done over the course of your career, which is I see you on social media, you're jetting off to this breaking story, that breaking story, you're traveling all around the world. That's not the time to be pitching you on, a weekend story, right?
Right. Yeah, you definitely have to know who you're pitching and what they do. And it's really just not helpful to send out these blind, cold emails to thousands and thousands of journalists across the United States, because it just winds up in a black hole. And I don't know that it's the best use of your time and energy. It's more useful to really drill down on a few journalists who cover areas that your clients work in, and to get to know those reporters. Put the time in, the investment in getting to know these people, find those opportunities to meet them, because every producer is at some point accessible. Maybe they're out on the road covering a breaking story, or they are at a panel discussion somewhere. Whatever, the producers are often accessible at some point, and you've got to know who they are and what they cover, and find the stories that have the bylines written by people who are writing in your client's topic area. And those are the people who you really have to develop relationships with, because it's just to go through the motions of sending out the mass email to thousands of reporters when it's just going to wind up in the trash bin anyway. I don't know that that's great use of your time. And it can wind up turning a reporter or producer off to you. And then every time they see something come into their inbox from you, they just click, check it and click delete. And so you don't want that. It's not good for your client either. So get to know reporters, get to know producers individually, and that's how you get your clients on when the opportunity is there. It's not going to happen frequently, but when that opportunity does happen, that's when the reporter or the producer is going to remember you.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. All right, Steve, it is time for our rapid fire questions segment, where we ask our guests to give one word or one sentence answers to the following 5 questions. We're kind of ripping off inside the actor's studio here, but we're going to go for it anyway. All right, so here you are in the hot seat. Ready?
Uh-huh.
Question number 1, favorite news source?
WNYC.
All right, local shout out. Very good.
Yes.
Twitter or LinkedIn?
Twitter.
Coffee or alcohol?
Coffee, lots of it every morning. But I do like my scotch. I definitely like single malt scotch. So, but that's at night.
All right, we'll put that on the holiday gift list. What kind of coffee, by the way?
Oh, it's got to be a dark roast, and yeah, it's definitely got to be a good quality single bean dark roast. Definitely.
You got a good selection there in Brooklyn, I know, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well, if you're going for a local brand, if I can do some public relations, I love Gorilla Coffee. They're roasters in Red Hook.
Awesome. All right, everybody go check them out. Favorite on the road food?
Diner food. I mean, if you want me to get specific with a particular dish, there not only will I get specific, I'll tell you where to get it. There's an excellent diner in Burlington, Vermont, that makes some of the greatest pancakes I've ever had, and it's an old school diner that goes retro with their interior and their waitresses' outfits. And now the name is escaping me. Why is it escaping me? Oh, listen, if you go to Burlington, Vermont, just search diner, and it's going to be the first name that comes up in the results, and you will not be disappointed. Trust me.
Nice. All right. Well, if anybody's tuning in from Burlington, please let us know. All right. And last question here, rapid fire. What do you want to be after you finish this career?
Oh, you know what? It's funny you say that. I actually have an idea, a real answer to that question. I want to open a nostalgic Brooklyn donut shop in honor of my grandfather, because he used to own the neighborhood donut shop on Kings Highway in Midwood. And it's kind of where my interest in journalism and current events started, because the counter that everybody sat at was this repository of information as people talked about the news of the day while reading the Daily News and the New York Post every day. And so I want to open up an old school donut shop like that.
Oh, that sounds good. I will be the first one there when you do that.
Thank you.
Well, Steve, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking all this time. Please let people know where they can find you online.
Well, you can certainly keep an eye out for some podcasts that I'm working on about the resiliency of New Yorkers during this economic crisis that we're experiencing through the coronavirus pandemic. That'll be coming out soon. I hope to launch that very soon. And you can just check out my name, stevekastenbaum.com. My website's getting updated as you and I speak right now.
Oh, fantastic. All right. We'll check that out for sure. Well, thanks again, Steve. And thank you everyone for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. And we'll see you next time on The PR Podcast.